So take Huckleberry Finn, right, and just slap him right onto Pride and Prejudice. And then give that a heaping spoonful of raging testosterone straight out of Conan the Barbarian. And that's this comic. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and today we're talking about Helen of Wyndhorn, both issues 1 and 2 by Tom King and Bilquis Evely. I'm still relatively new to Tom King. I haven't read most of his really acclaimed stuff at DC, but the more I read from him, the more impressed I am. He's just such a versatile and detailed writer. He can just bounce from genre to genre, and it's all high quality. I'm at the point where I'm considering driving back to Michigan in May for the Motor City Comic Con just because I know he's gonna be there. Anyway, this series is highly engaging, and I mean that in a few ways. First of all, the plot moves along at an astonishing pace, and the cliffhangers at the end of issue 1 and 2 are incredibly intriguing. And secondly, the language used is a literature nerd's dream. This one character who's sort of narrating the whole story is a very prim and proper English governess, and her vocabulary is so broad and dense every time she speaks. It makes me wonder if Tom King has this kind of vocabulary at his command just 24/7, or if he had to do research to get it to sound this authentic. Like, listen to this. I admit that despite his banal speechifying, I did extract some pleasure from the tour. That's some dusty language right there. But it's so refreshing. I feel like I'm reading a work of literature that had real effort put into it, not just whatever I could come up with this month to get my issue out on time. And the art is just as distinguished. Look at this gorgeous landscape and architecture, and even the clouds behind the building there. It's got a very Art Nouveau feel to it. But smack dab in the middle of all of this pomp, we have this character Helen, who's the Huckleberry Finn type, who can outdrink the US Navy and outsmoke Marge Simpson's sisters. It's got this great Mark Twain, Connecticut Yankee, and King Arthur's Court type feeling to it, and that contrast makes it really easily accessible to somebody who's really not that well read in fine literature. However, I don't want to make it seem like it's the simplest thing ever. This story is from the perspective of a journalist who is interviewing an ex-governess whose charge was a wild young lady named Helen, whose grandfather was a real-life barbarian. And the character work is all so thorough that it's really not clear who the main character is at any given moment. And if that sounds too complicated for you, then you shouldn't have picked up a Tom King book, because it doesn't get any more non-convoluted than that. So if you're still wondering what the heck is going on with this series, this is Helen. Her father is a writer, and he just died when the story starts. He's been hitchhiking all over the United States with his young daughter as he writes things and finds work here and there. But now that the father is dead, the grandfather has sent for Helen to come live with him, and he's sent this governess, Lilith Appleton, to retrieve her. They find out that her grandfather lives in this massive mansion, and she doesn't really fit in. You know, she's been scamping around for a while, so she's not doing her studying, and she's getting drunk every day on all this vintage wine, and she's having nightmares every night saying there's something creeping around outside the window. And at the very end of the first issue, we see this giant bat minotaur werewolf creature thing coming to attack them. But it is promptly killed by this guy, who turns out to be her grandfather. Now, Helen's father had written all of these stories about this guy, Afan the Vanquished, and the immediate implication is that those stories were probably at least based on true stories of this guy's father, whose name is Barnabas Cole. Getting right into issue 2, Helen really wants to know what the heck is going on at this place and who her grandfather is, but every time she tries to press him for answers, he just kind of shrugs her off. And we have this great dinner table scene where Helen throws a bit of a fit. She's like, "Why won't you tell me anything?" And she slams the table, and then he chuckles and he goes, "No, no, no." And then he rips over the entire table, spilling all the food onto the floor, which is simultaneously the last thing I expected and the thing I most hoped for. He said, "You think you can outwild me on my turf?" So even though the grandfather is kind of aloof, he's off doing his own thing and not really explaining himself to anybody, not putting any effort into having a relationship with Helen, you can tell that there's some admiration there. He's happy to see a little bit of the wild energy that he has being passed down to her. Earlier in the issue, Helen and Lilith had found him in the garden with this little creature that looks like an Eevee mixed with a minotaur or a goat or something. And after Helen has her outburst, and then Lilith has an outburst with Barnabas saying that he needs to show her what his life is like, because the only path of life that Helen has ever seen is her drunk father who ended up dying early, Barnabas decides that he has to take that creature off to its natural habitat, and Helen gets to go with him. And that's where the issue ends. We see them walking off to return this little creature. And it's just great for any audience because we have this super chaotic yet very refined, strong male character, but we also have this strong, confident, leading female character who's not just some squeaky, clean, girls can do everything type character. She's got her flaws, but she's a well-rounded, interesting character. And we've got Lilith, the governess, who's fascinating in her own way, and even the butler, Joseph, who's got the cheekbones that just don't quit, is really fun to read. So far, there has not been a single moment, character, plot point, or even panel that are not really well done. I'm very interested in where the series is going. This is a flavor that you just don't very often get in comics, and when you do get it in the comics, it seems more like a fan fiction sort of thing. It's not really its own literary work, whereas this feels very established. It is what it is, and it's good at being what it is. I absolutely recommend that you buy it for yourself. I'm sorry about all the spoilers. I'm just really excited about it. It's so good. So I'm gonna rate Helen of Wyndhorn so far a high 9 out of 10. It's really great. It's like McDonald's up in here. I'm loving it. So make sure you've got Helen of Wyndhorn on your pull list. I promise you won't regret it. It's great stuff. And if you have read it, what do you think?